You won't regret it, I promise. Subscribe. I signed the papers with the steadiness of a man who has lived his whole life waiting for this moment, though I would never have admitted that aloud. $2 million. That was the figure that left my account that morning in Santa Barbara. And the oddest thing is my hands didn't even tremble. After 40 years in engineering, after endless blueprints and revisions and compromises, I thought I had run out of nerves. The realtor smiled at me, a rehearsed smile she probably wore for every wealthy retiree who came along. But I wasn't buying for prestige, for the neighbor's envy, or even for comfort. I was buying for something more elusive, something I had never managed to hold on to for long: silence. Do you know what silence feels like when you've gone without it most of your life? It's heavier than you expect, more textured. It has a weight, a scent, even a taste. I had rented quiet for years, short trips, a cabin here, a week in some beach town there, but always silence was temporary. This house, this villa facing the Pacific with its wide cedar beams and its tall windows spilling light, was supposed to make silence permanent. I toured the rooms the first night like a pilgrim in a shrine. The marble counters in the kitchen gleamed pale in the moonlight. The master bedroom smelled faintly of new wood and salt. And when I opened the sliding glass door, the ocean spoke directly into the room. Downstairs, the living area stretched out like an open palm, and the sound of the tide bounced off the high ceiling. I walked barefoot, touching the walls, the banister, even the cool tile of the bathroom floor, like I had to convince myself it was mine. What did I want from it? Not parties, not family gatherings, not the raucous laughter of grandchildren tearing through the hallways. That image had died with Emily, my only daughter, 3 years before. A drunk driver ended that dream on a highway just outside Fresno. She had been 32, brilliant, determined, sometimes stubborn, but always my compass. The sound of her laugh could lift me even on the days when blueprints blurred and clients complained. When she died, I stopped expecting noise to ever comfort me again. So no, I didn't want company. I wanted mornings with coffee warming my hands on the porch, afternoons watching gulls circle the breakers, evenings reading until the book fell onto my chest and I drifted into sleep with the waves murmuring like an endless prayer. I wanted stillness to be mine, for once not borrowed. And yet, because there is always a yet even as I unpacked my modest belongings, even as I lined the books on the shelf and folded shirts into the cedar dresser, a voice inside me whispered, "They won't let you keep it to yourself." Who were they? You already know. My family. Well, what's left of it? Brian Miller, my son-in-law, or more accurately, my daughter's widower. A man I never trusted, though I endured him for Emily's sake. Brian was ambitious without being capable, loud without being convincing, needy without ever admitting need. He had a gift for turning favors into obligations, debts that never seemed to end. And when Emily was alive, I paid them. Oh, how I paid them. Tuition, rent, car repairs, hospital bills. The MBA he bragged about to anyone who'd listen was financed line by line through my checking account. I kept the receipts. I always keep the receipts. That is an engineer's curse and blessing. When Emily passed, I told myself the connection with Brian would fade. There would be condolences, a few strained visits, then silence. Instead, his orbit grew larger, pulling in cousins, friends, distant relations who somehow believed my wallet was still their safety net. A man alone, with no wife and no surviving children, with a steady pension and savings. That's not a relative, that's a target. Still, I tried to push that thought away. Emily had begged me in her last years to take better care of myself. "Dad, you give and give, but who's looking after you?" she would say. She told me that generosity without boundaries wasn't kindness. It was self-erasure. She said the world would never draw the line for me. I would have to draw it myself. But you know what happens, don't you? You tell yourself you'll be stronger tomorrow. And tomorrow, the request comes, and you give in again. The villa was supposed to be my line in the sand. For several weeks it was. I rose before sunrise and watched the Pacific turn from black to silver to blue. I ate meals, I cooked for myself simple meals, but meals without interruption, without anyone complaining about the seasoning or the timing. I read old journals I had once been too tired to finish. I even slept better, though age never lets you sleep like you did at 40. The silence filled the spaces in me that had been empty for decades. Then, one evening, as the sky softened to a blue-gray and the air smelled faintly of salt and eucalyptus, the phone rang. I should have ignored it. I should have let the machine answer. But loneliness plays tricks on you. Even a man who claims to want nothing but silence sometimes craves a voice, even if it's the wrong one. So I answered. "Old man," Brian's voice burst through, arrogant and brash, as though he had been waiting to give this performance. "We're on our way. 15 people. Beds, towels, food. 3 weeks. We'll be there in 40 minutes. That was it. That was the entire message. Not a request. Not a suggestion. A proclamation. A declaration of rights over something that was never his. 40 minutes. That was all the time I had before my sanctuary became a circus. And here's the part that still shamus me. I didn't say no. I didn't slam the phone down or tell him to stay the hell away. I stood there staring at the ocean through the glass, frozen. Some reflex in me still wanted to be included. Still thought, maybe if I let them in, they'll value me. Maybe they'll treat me as part of something again. Do you see the sickness in that thought? Or do you understand it? Because I think if you've ever been alone long enough, you might. But the truth was clear even before the headlights appeared at the bottom of the drive. They weren't coming to visit. They were coming to occupy. When the convoy of SUVs arrived, music thumping so loud it rattled the glass, I knew the whisper in my skull had been right all along. They wouldn't let me keep it. They never had. They never would. And that is where it began. They came like a storm front, rolling up the drive in 4 black SUVs, headlights glaring, shaking the air as if the very ground beneath my villa belonged to them. The engines cut, doors slammed, and within seconds, my quiet life was swallowed whole. You can't imagine the sound until you've heard it. Laughter too loud, shouts too sharp, the scrape of coolers dragged across stone, the clang of bottles clinking together like weapons. I stood in the doorway, not to greet, but to defend, though my stance probably looked weak to them. I wasn't tall enough, broad enough, and Brian knew it. He led the charge, as always, walking straight past me without so much as a glance, arms spread wide like Caesar returning from conquest. Nice, old man, real nice. Plenty of room for us all. Us all. There it was again, that subtle theft in language. Not your house. Not your space. Ours. The others followed like ants claiming sugar. Jessica came first. Yoga mats slung over her shoulder. Hair pulled into a high ponytail that bounced with self-assurance. In her other hand, she carried a ring light, and she didn't even pause before announcing, "I'll need the master bedroom. Best lighting upstairs." I should have blocked the staircase. I should have told her the master bedroom was mine. But I stood frozen, throat tight, watching as she ascended 2 steps at a time. The thud of her feet on my stairs sounded like nails hammered into my resolve. In the kitchen, Mike and Kevin were already rifling through my refrigerator. The pop and hiss of a beer can opening echoed like mockery. Foam spilled onto the marble counter, trickling in a thin white river. "Cheers, man." Mike lifted his can toward me as though I were a bartender serving him. This place is epic. Epic. That word again, emptied of meaning by people who never earned anything they described with it. Ashley, bored already, collapsed onto my sofa with her shoes still on, scrolling through her phone, streaks of wet sand falling from her sandals onto my new rug. She didn't even look up when she asked, "What's the Wi-Fi password?" As if oxygen itself would run out if I didn't provide it fast enough. 15 bodies spread across the house like a stain. Bags unzipped, clothes flung onto chairs. Someone dragging a cooler across the hardwood with a screech that made me wince. Voices overlapped, a dozen separate conversations layering into a single roar. My sanctuary, my cathedral, as I had called it in my first days, was transformed into a carnival tent. I tried once, quietly, to assert myself. "Listen." Brian clapped a hand on my shoulder, hard enough to sting. "Relax, Richard. You've got the space. We've got the energy. Win-win. Win-win. The language of deals, mergers, takeovers." As though I were nothing more than the passive shareholder of my own life. The air thickened with smells I hadn't invited. Beer, perfume, sunscreen. greasy takeout spilling from brown bags already opened on my dining table. Someone connected a portable speaker, and music thundered through the living room, shaking the window panes. I retreated, step by step, to my office, closed the door, locked it, pressed my forehead against the wood. My heart pounded, not fear exactly, but the kind of anger that surges when every nerve is rubbed raw. I could hear them through the walls. Jessica barking orders for silence while she filmed her live stream upstairs. Kevin shouting about beer pong. Someone laughing too loud. The scrape of furniture dragged into new, careless positions. I looked around my office, the only room untouched, the only space where my orders still held. My books lined up neatly, my desk lamp casting its soft cone of light, my receipts and files stacked with an engineer's precision. This was mine, and yet the noise pressing in made it feel as if even here I was only renting. My phone sat on the desk, black and silent. I stared at it. Do you know that moment when your body acts before your mind? When a decision is made in your bones long before your head consents? That's what happened. My hand reached for the phone as though pulled by a magnet. I dialed, 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was calm, almost tender. Mine trembled at first, then steadied. This is Richard Walker. I have 15 people in my house who refuse to leave. The words burned as they left my mouth. Burned but cleansed. The dispatcher asked for details. I gave my name, my address, my age. I explained that they were relatives, in-laws, extended family, but that they had not been invited, that they had simply arrived, loud and demanding, and were treating my property as theirs. We're sending a unit now, sir. Please stay in a safe place. Safe place. In my own house. Isn't that absurd? To be told to find safety in the rooms you paid for, because others don't respect you enough to knock at the door. I hung up. I sat in the chair, hands pressed together, and waited. The music thudded. The laughter rose. Jessica's voice carried down the stairs like a commandment. But beneath it all, in me, something shifted. A boundary I had never drawn before had clicked into place. And when the sirens finally echoed faint in the distance, I felt the first fragile thread of peace returning. Not the peace of silence, not yet, but the peace of knowing I had chosen not to disappear. That was the night everything changed. The sirens came faint at first, barely distinguishable from the pounding bass of the portable speaker. I caught them before anyone else did. I've always had the kind of ears that listen for what doesn't belong. That's what 40 years of engineering does. You learn to notice the vibration that's wrong, the hum that signals something failing. When the red and blue lights finally swept the windows, I felt the tide in the room shift. Voices faltered, laughter dimmed. Brian's head snapped toward the driveway, beer can in hand, eyes narrowing. What the hell did you do, old man? He barked, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. I didn't answer. I stayed in my office, door cracked open, watching shadows move against the walls, as if the house itself were bracing for the blow. The knock came, firm, practiced. Not tentative, not friendly, the knock of authority. I opened the door before Brian could. Sergeant Johnson stood there, broad-shouldered, late 40s maybe, his uniform crisp, his expression a mixture of calm and readiness. Beside him, Officer Martinez, younger, eyes sharp, hand near his belt but not resting on it. Sir, Johnson said, nodding to me. Richard Walker? Yes. My voice steadied in a way I didn't expect. This is my home. He glanced past me at the crowd spilling beer on the rug. Jessica, with her ring light still propped in the corner. The cluster of relatives staring wide-eyed at authority in their vacation clothes. May we see proof of ownership, sir? Johnson asked. I had it ready, the deed, my ID, everything in a folder I had kept on the desk since moving in. Engineers have it. Never leave documentation to chance. I handed it over. Johnson scanned it, nodded once, handed it back. Thank you, Mr. Walker. He turned to face the others. His voice rose, not with anger, but with the flat certainty of a man used to being obeyed. This is Mr. Walker's residence. He has made it clear you are not guests here. You are required to leave the premises immediately. The silence that followed was almost holy. The only sound was the surf pounding faintly beyond the glass. Then Brian laughed, bitter, sharp. You called the cops on family? You serious, Richard? I met his eyes. For once, I didn't look away. Yes, that single syllable seemed to rattle him more than the police presence. He stepped forward, his voice rising. This is my father-in-law's place. My wife, God rest her soul, she would have wanted us here. He's old. He doesn't know what he's doing. The words cut deep, dragging Emily into the room like a shield. For a moment, I nearly faltered, nearly gave in. But then I remembered her last words to me on the subject of Brian. Dad, he'll drain you if you let him. Promise me you won't let him. Johnson stepped between us. Sir, he said to Brian, tone firm now. The documents are clear. This is not your property. If you and your party don't leave voluntarily, we will escort you out. Murmurs rippled through the group. Jessica lowered her phone, for once not streaming. Kevin muttered something about overreacting. Ashley crossed her arms, sulking like a teenager. Brian turned, searching for all eyes among them. None met his eyes. Not really, because even parasites understand when the host has closed the door. Fine, he spat. He grabbed his bag, slung it over his shoulder, stormed toward the door. But you just signed your own death warrant, Richard. You'll regret this. One by one, the others followed, muttering, dragging their things, the slam of car doors punctuating their defeat. The music cut off. The air thinned. When the last SUV pulled away, silence flooded the house again. But it wasn't the silence I had dreamed of. It was heavier, charged, like the silence after a fight when the bruises haven't yet surfaced. Johnson gave me a look, part pity, part respect. You did the right thing, sir. Call us again if they come back. I nodded, though the words barely sank in. Martinez offered a small smile before they left, their lights fading into the night. And then it was just me and the echo of their presence. Sand on the rug, beer cans denting the counter, the faint smell of perfume clinging to the air. Evidence of violation. Evidence of my weakness, too, because hadn't I let them walk in? Hadn't I stood silent until it became unbearable? I walked through the room slowly, turning off lights, closing doors. My villa felt different now, less like a sanctuary, more like a fortress that had barely withstood its first siege. In the kitchen, I picked up one of the abandoned beer cans. Empty. I crushed it in my fist, metal groaning, sharp edges biting my palm. It bled a little, not much. Enough to sting. Enough to remind me I was alive. That night I sat on the porch staring at the Pacific, the waves black and restless. My peace had been broken, but something else had been born in its place. Resolve. I had said no, finally, but I knew Brian. He wouldn't stop here. He'd find another way to punish me for standing my ground. And I, for the first time, almost welcomed the fight. I woke the next morning to silence. Real silence. No footsteps upstairs, no music pounding through the walls, no doors slamming. Only the ocean breathing, the gulls calling, and my own heartbeat, steady at last. For a brief moment, I thought maybe it was over. But the world doesn't let men like me rest long. The first text came just after 9. A number I didn't recognize. A message I could hardly believe. Shame on you. How could you treat your family that way? Another followed minutes later. Selfish old man, throwing your daughter's family out. Disgusting. By noon, my inbox was a flood. Emails, messages, voicemails, some polite in tone, others dripping with venom, all repeating the same accusation. I was a cruel miser, a bitter recluse who had betrayed his own flesh and blood. I didn't need to wonder where it came from. Brian. He had always been quick with words, quicker with manipulation. Now he had an audience, a faceless crowd eager for outrage. By evening, I found screenshots forwarded to me by an old colleague. Posts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Pictures of him and Jessica standing in front of my villa, arms crossed in mock despair. Captions that twisted the truth into spectacle. Kicked out of my late wife's father's house. 15 of us left homeless. After all we've done for him. No heart, no family. Hundreds of comments beneath, most of them strangers. Some calling me cruel, others demanding I be ashamed. A few offering prayers for Brian and his struggling family. The lies spread like oil slicks on water, dark and impossible to contain. I sat at my desk, the glow of the screen turning my face ghostly, and for the first time in years, I felt the old weakness tug at me. The voice that said, "Give in. Apologize. Open the door. Better to be wronged quietly than hated publicly." But then another voice rose, quieter but firmer. "Emily's. Dad, don't let him drain you. Don't let him erase you." I closed the laptop. I stood, walked to the filing cabinet, and pulled out the first thick folder. Receipts, statements, canceled checks. 6 years of records, meticulously organized. MBA tuition, $118,000. Down payment for Brian and Emily's first house, $92,000. New car after his accident, $28,000. Hospital bills, $42,000. Wedding costs I had covered without complaint, $15,000. Nearly $300,000 in total. 300,000 reasons why I was not selfish, not cruel, not the villain in his little morality play. I spread the papers across the desk, sheet by sheet, like laying out evidence in a courtroom. The smell of ink and paper filled the office, grounding me, reminding me that numbers don't lie, even if people do. That night, I called my lawyer. "Howard," I said when he picked up, his voice groggy. "It's Richard. I need to talk." He sighed softly. "What happened?" I told him everything. The invasion, the police, the social media attacks. He didn't interrupt, only listened. And when I finished, his voice was calm, steady. "Do you have proof of what you've given him?" "Every cent," I said. "Good. Then let him howl online." Words fade. Numbers hold. We made an appointment for the next day. I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the papers spread before me. For once, instead of feeling used, I felt prepared. Of course, the attacks didn't stop overnight. By morning, Brian had doubled down, posting videos now, his voice cracking with feigned sorrow as he painted himself the victim of an old man's cruelty. Some people saw through it. Most didn't. That's the nature of outrage. Truth is slower than lies. But I had something Brian didn't: documentation. And for the first time in years, I was ready to use it. Howard Brennan's office sat on the corner of State Street, tucked between a wine shop and a real estate agency that seemed to change hands every year. I had walked past it a dozen times, never thinking I'd need what was inside. But on that gray Tuesday morning, with Brian's words still burning on my phone screen, I stepped through the glass door and felt the air shift. Cooler, heavier, scented faintly of old leather and dust. Howard looked much as he had when Emily was alive. Silver hair swept back, glasses perched on his nose, suits that seemed a size too big for his wiry frame. He stood when I entered, extended his hand, and gave me the kind of look that says I've seen worse, and you'll survive this too. "Richard," he said. "It's been a while." "Too long," I admitted, sinking into the chair across from his desk. "I wish it were under better circumstances." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Tell me everything." So I did. Every detail of the invasion, the police visit, the social media crucifixion. I told it all in one long, breathless stretch, as though confessing a crime. Howard listened without a single interruption, only nodding at intervals, jotting notes with his fountain pen. When I finished, silence hung in the room for a beat too long. My chest tightened. "Well?" He tapped the pen against the desk. "You have two problems, Richard. One is reputational. That's already in motion. Brian's painting you as the villain. The other is legal. And that one," he leaned forward, "that one you can fight if you have the documentation." I opened the folder I had carried under my arm like a shield. Pages spread across his desk. Tuition receipts, canceled checks, bank statements, wedding invoices, hospital bills. Howard's eyes narrowed as he scanned line by line. 300,000, he murmured. "Over 6 years." He looked up at me. "You kept everything?" "I'm an engineer," I said simply. "We keep records." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "Then we have leverage. Not just defense, Richard. Offense." For the first time in days, a flicker of light sparked in me. Offense. The idea that I could push back, not merely endure. Still, doubt crept in like fog. What if no one cares about numbers? What if they only care about the story Brian tells? Howard steepled his fingers. Numbers don't care whether people believe them. They exist. And judges listen to numbers. We spent an hour sorting the papers into categories, flagging the most significant sums, creating a timeline that showed exactly how Brian's success had been built on my back. By the end, my desk looked like a battlefield map. Every line of ink another trench I had dug over the years. But documents alone weren't enough. We needed certification. We needed proof that no one could dismiss as fabricated. That meant Patricia Williams. Patricia had been the branch manager at my bank for more than 20 years. She'd watched my hair turn gray each time I deposited another check for Emily's future, had smiled politely as I signed away pieces of my savings. She had known Emily, too, in her younger years. The girl who bounced checks at 20 and came to her father for rescue. Patricia had never judged, only raised an eyebrow and asked if I wanted receipts certified. I called her that afternoon. Her voice was brisk, professional. "Mr. Walker, how are you?" "I've been better," I admitted. "Patricia, I need a favor. I need official certification of my records. Every transfer, every payment to Brian and Emily, the whole 6 years." She didn't hesitate. "Of course. When can you come in?" The next morning, I walked into the bank with the weight of years under my arm. Patricia met me in her office door, glasses perched low, eyes sharp as ever. She looked at the folders, then at me, and something softened in her face. "I heard about Emily," she said quietly. "I never said it properly. I'm sorry." The grief flickered in me, sudden and sharp, though it had been years. "Thank you," I said. She gestured to the chair. "Let's get you what you need." For 2 hours we went through every document, every transfer, stamping and signing, adding the official seal. The sound of her pen scratching across the pages was strangely comforting, like order returning to chaos. When she finished, she stacked the certified records neatly, slid them back across the desk, and said, "No one can dispute these now." I took them in both hands, heavier than any blueprint I had ever carried. Proof, truth, in ink and paper. As I left the bank, the late afternoon sun caught the glass doors, blinding for a moment. I paused on the sidewalk, the folders pressed against my chest, and thought of Emily. "Dad, don't be weak. Don't let him drain you." For once, I believed I might not. It was Margaret Chun who called me next. Not a stranger with venom in their throat, not one of Brian's chorus of enablers, but Margaret, the girl who had once eaten dinners at my table during college breaks, who had stayed up late in our living room, laughing with Emily until the walls shook. I hadn't heard her voice in years, and when I saw her name flash across the screen, my heart jolted. For one absurd moment, I thought maybe she was calling to check on me, to say she remembered the man who had driven her and Emily to weekend trips, who had cooked pancakes for them on lazy Sundays. But hope is a dangerous thing. "Richard," she said, voice clipped, restrained. "I've been seeing what Brian posted. I need to ask, is it true?" The question landed like a stone. Is it true? Not "how are you?" Not "what happened?" Just suspicion, wrapped in formality. "What exactly have you heard?" I asked, though I already knew, that you threw them out. 15 of them. No warning. That you've cut yourself off, that you're bitter, maybe even unstable. Her voice faltered just slightly, but not enough. "Richard, Emily wouldn't have wanted." I snapped before she could finish. "Don't you dare tell me what Emily would have wanted." The silence that followed was thick, electric. I could hear her breathing on the line, quickened, unsettled. Finally, she said, quieter now, "Then explain it. Because right now, everyone thinks." "I don't give a damn what everyone thinks," I cut in. Then I caught myself, the anger spilling too raw. I lowered my voice. "Come here. See for yourself." There was a pause, long enough that I almost thought she'd refuse. Then, softly, "All right." Margaret arrived the next afternoon. She stepped out of her car in a gray suit, hair tied back, the look of a professional woman pressed into armor by years of expectation. She was older now. We both were. But I could still see the flicker of the girl Emily had once trusted like a sister. Inside, she looked around the villa, her gaze lingering on the ocean through the glass. "It's beautiful," she said, almost reluctantly. "Emily would have loved it here. She never got to," I said flatly. We sat at the dining table. Between us lay the folder of documents I had begun carrying everywhere, as though proof itself were a shield. Margaret folded her hands. meeting my eyes with that careful mix of pity and judgment people reserve for the accused. "Brian says you abandoned him," she began. "That after everything he and Emily went through, you turned your back. He says you're hoarding what should be shared. That I'm selfish," I finished for her. She hesitated. "Yes." I opened the folder. One by one, I slid the papers across the table. Tuition payments, bank transfers, medical bills, mortgage receipts. Margaret glanced at the first, then the second, then leaned forward, her eyes scanning the numbers faster, her lips tightening as the weight of it accumulated. 118,000, I said quietly. His MBA, paid in full by me. 92,000 the down payment on their house. 28,000 for the car. 42,000 in hospital bills. 15 for the wedding. I tapped a stack. Almost 300,000 in 6 years. "Does that sound like abandonment to you?" Margaret's face changed. The judgment faltered. The pity turned into something closer to shame. She shuffled the papers, as though hoping the numbers might rearrange themselves into a story that matched Brian's. They didn't. Numbers don't lie. I didn't know," she whispered. "Of course you didn't," I said, "because Brian never told anyone. He let the world believe he built his life on effort, when really he built it on me." She leaned back, folding her arms, her gaze drifting toward the ocean. For a long moment she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost broken. "Emily used to tell me you were the most generous man she knew. She said it scared her sometimes, how much you gave. She worried you'd disappear into it." I swallowed hard, throat tight. She wasn't wrong. Margaret looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw something other than judgment in her eyes. Guilt, regret, maybe even understanding. "Richard," she said slowly, "I believed him because it was easier. Outrage is easy. Proof is harder. I'm sorry. The words should have felt like balm. Instead, they cut. Because apology doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't erase the image of a girl I once welcomed like a daughter, now standing on the side of the man who had leached from me." I gathered the papers back into the folder, my hand steady. "Sorry doesn't matter, Margaret. Not now. What matters is that the truth exists, whether anyone wants to see it or not." She nodded, almost ashamed, and stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "If this goes to court, if you need me to say what I've seen, I will." I didn't answer right away. The ocean crashed against the rocks outside, filling the silence. Finally, I said, "Do it for Emily, not for me." She left, and the villa was quiet again. But it wasn't the peaceful quiet I had longed for. It was the heavy, watchful quiet of a battlefield before the next fight. Court dates have a way of making time feel heavier. Each day leading up to it carried its own burden, like stones added to a pack I already struggled to lift. I woke earlier, slept less, paced the villa at odd hours. The sound of the Pacific no longer soothing but relentless, as if the waves themselves were rehearsing the arguments to come. Howard called me every morning. He had a voice built for steadiness, clipped but reassuring, the kind of voice that can carry a man across a battlefield without panic. "Richard," he said one Tuesday, "the case isn't about feelings. It's about proof. You have it. We'll walk in, present the records, and let the numbers speak." "Numbers don't bleed," I muttered. He paused. "What do you mean?" "Numbers don't feel betrayal. They don't know shame. People do, and people are irrational." Howard sighed softly, the way men do when they've tried to talk sense into an immovable rock. "Judges are trained to see past theatrics. Don't underestimate that." But how could I not? I had spent a lifetime watching charisma beat merit, watching louder voices drown out quieter truths, and Brian was nothing if not loud. The days blurred into preparation. Howard came to the villa one evening, bringing stacks of binders, each one labeled, color-coded, tabbed with a precision that made even my engineer's soul proud. We sat at the dining table, the same table where Emily and Margaret once studied late into the night, and spread the binders like weapons across the surface. "This," Howard said, tapping the first binder, "is education. Tuition payments, transfers, receipts. This," he tapped the next, "is housing. Mortgage support, down payment. This, medical expenses. And here wedding costs, miscellaneous support, even the small things. He looked up at me. "We'll show the court not just generosity, Richard. Pattern, sustained, consistent support." The image of a man drained. The words struck me. That was exactly what I felt, like a reservoir bled dry over years until only sediment remained. Howard must have seen the flicker in my eyes because his tone softened. "You're not the villain here. You've been cast as one, but truth has a way of breaking through." I wanted to believe him. God, I did. But the ghost of Emily hovered in every room. Her laugh in the hall, her head bent over textbooks at this very table, her voice calling Dad from upstairs. I imagined her watching, imagined her weighing my actions, imagined her disappointment if I let bitterness consume me. That night, after Howard left, I sat alone with the binders, flipping through pages. Each receipt was a memory, each canceled check a story. The tuition payment for Brian's MBA. I remembered the night he told me he'd been accepted, how Emily's eyes had shone with pride, how I'd hidden my hesitation behind a smile. The down payment for the house. I remembered standing in their new kitchen, paint still drying on the walls, Emily hugging me and whispering, "Thank you, Dad." The hospital bills. I remember Brian's accident, the phone call that jolted me from sleep, the endless hours in waiting rooms while he healed. Every page was a record not just of money, but of love. Misused love, maybe. Unbalanced love, but love all the same. The summons arrived in the mail 3 days later. A thick envelope, heavy with official language. Judge Camilla Reed's name printed at the top. Court date set for a Wednesday morning. I held the paper in my hand for a long time, the words blurring until they felt less like ink and more like destiny. That night I dreamed of Emily. She stood in the villa's living room, sunlight pouring through the windows, her hair glowing like it had when she was 17. She looked at me the way only children can look at their parents, both proud and exasperated. "Dad," she said softly, "don't let him rewrite me." I woke with tears on my face and the steady crash of the ocean outside, relentless as truth itself. The morning of the hearing drew near. My villa felt like both sanctuary and cage. I walked the rooms again and again, rehearsing words I knew I'd never speak aloud. What would I say to Brian when I saw him across the courtroom? Would I spit my anger or hold my silence? And then I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. What would Emily want? The answer came not in thunder, but in quiet certainty. She wouldn't want vengeance. She wouldn't want me to punish Brian for the sake of punishment. She would want fairness, boundaries, justice that didn't poison me in the process. Justice, not revenge. So I gathered the binders, packed them carefully into the briefcase Howard had given me, and placed it by the door. The weight of it seemed to anchor the house, to anchor me. The day of judgment was coming, and for once, I didn't feel like running. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of air that carries centuries of arguments, victories, and defeats. I arrived early, briefcase in hand, shoes echoing on the tile floor as if announcing my dread. Howard walked beside me, calm as ever, his tie knotted precisely, his face unreadable. "You'll be fine," he murmured as we entered the chamber. "Just remember, you're not on trial." He is. But try telling that to the heart of a man who spent his life absorbing blame. The room was larger than I expected. Rows of benches behind us already filling with strangers, curious onlookers. A few faces I half recognized from Brian's order. Reporters sat scattered among them, phones ready. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was a spectacle. Brian sat at the opposite table, jaw clenched, suit too sharp for his character. Beside him, his attorney, a slick young man with hair, combed so precisely it looked lacquered, flipped through papers like weapons. Brian's eyes found mine across the room. He smirked, as if daring me to falter, and then Judge Camilla Reed entered. Everyone rose. She was a tall woman, mid-50s, with dark hair pulled back and an expression that conveyed no tolerance for nonsense. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that silenced even the restless shuffling in the gallery. "Case number 211743, she said. "Brian Miller versus Richard Walker." Just hearing it, my name against his, sent a chill through me, as if the very court had already cast us as equals, when in truth our positions were never equal. Brian's attorney began with fire. He painted a picture of cruelty, abandonment, a father-in-law who had turned his back on family after tragedy. His words spilled smoothly, practiced, filled with crescendos designed to draw sympathy. Mr. Miller and his relatives, he declared, were unceremoniously evicted from the home they considered a haven. A grieving family, left in the cold by a man who should have been their protector. I wanted to laugh bitterly at the fear of it. Left in the cold? In California, an SUV's worth more than some houses? But I held my tongue. Judges don't like interruptions. Then it was Howard's turn. He rose slowly, as if pacing himself, and laid a single binder on the table. His voice was calm, deliberate, the opposite of Brian's lawyer's performance. "Your Honor," he said, "what you'll see today is not a story of abandonment, but of sacrifice. Not of cruelty, but of exploitation. Over 6 years, Mr. Walker provided nearly $300,000 to Mr. Miller and his late daughter, Emily. Education, housing, medical bills, even their wedding. This isn't hearsay. This is documented fact." He opened the binder, spread the first certified receipts across the table, and the quiet click of paper echoed like a gavel. Judge Reed leaned forward, studying the documents. "Certified?" she asked. Howard nodded. "By Patricia Williams, branch manager of Coastal Bank, present in this court as a witness if needed." The judge's eyes flicked briefly toward Brian, whose smirk had already begun to wilt. Then came the questioning. Brian took the stand, shoulders squared, voice thick with indignation. "I was married to Emily," he said, stressing her name like a charm. "She would never have wanted this. Richard has money, more than he'll ever need, and yet he turned us away. He humiliated us." Howard approached the witness stand, binder in hand. "Mr. Miller, can you confirm that Richard Walker paid for your MBA tuition in full?" Brian hesitated. "He helped." Howard flipped the page, held it up. $118,000. Paid directly to Stanford Business School. Would you call that help, Mr. Miller? Brian shifted in his seat, sweat beginning to bead at his temple. "And this mortgage payment," Howard continued, turning another page. $92,000 for your home. Did you repay Mr. Walker for that? Brian's jaw tightened. "It was a gift." "A gift," Howard repeated, his tone flat. "A gift you've since repaid with accusations of cruelty?" Brian's liar objected. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Reed said, but her eyes never left Brian. By the time Howard finished, Brian's story looked less like grief and more like greed laid bare under fluorescent lights. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice softer now, "would you like to make a statement?" My legs felt heavy as I rose. I didn't want to speak. I wanted the papers, the numbers to be enough. But I could feel Emily with me, urging me not to disappear into silence. I looked at Brian. His face was red, his mouth tight. And then I looked at Judge Reed. "I'm not here for vengeance," I said, my voice low but steady. "I'm here for truth. I supported Brian and Emily for years, without complaint, because I loved my daughter. I would have kept supporting them if it meant her happiness. But when she died, something changed. Brian didn't just grieve, he consumed. He treated my life as his inheritance, as if my role was to keep giving until I had nothing left." I paused, the words catching. "I won't let Emily's memory be twisted into permission for my exploitation. She wanted me to be fair, not weak. That's why I'm here." The room was silent. Even Brian's liar didn't move. Judge Reed folded her hands. "Thank you, Mr. Walker." By afternoon, the outcome was clear. Brian's theatrics had withered under the weight of receipts, certified statements, and my quiet testimony. "Mr. Miller," Judge Reed said finally, "you have defamed your father-in-law publicly and sought restitution where none was owed. The court orders a formal retraction of your claims, along with restitution to Mr. Walker for legal expenses. Do you understand?" Brian's voice cracked. "Yes, Your Honor." I closed my eyes. Not in triumph, not in relief. In something quieter, something closer to justice. The villa felt different when I returned from court. The same walls, the same windows spilling the Pacific into every corner, but the air had shifted. The silence wasn't fragile anymore. It was heavy, deliberate, earned, like a cathedral after the choir has gone, echoing with what had been sung. I set the briefcase on the dining table and left it there, unopened. The binders, the receipts, the stamps and seals, they had done their work. I no longer needed to shuffle the pages, to reassure myself that my life was documented in numbers. The truth had spoken in that courtroom, and for once, it had been heard. But justice, I learned, is not a feast. It's a thin meal, enough to keep you alive, but never enough to satisfy. Brian's retraction came 2 days later, posted online with the hollow ring of forced apology. I regret the statements I made about Richard Walker, it read. He supported Emily and me more than anyone knows. I was wrong to suggest otherwise. No admission of greed. No recognition of the harm done. Just words arranged by a lawyer's hand, drained of sincerity. The comments beneath were a mix. Some praising him for his courage, others calling him out for the lie. Most simply moving on to the next outrage. That's the world now. Storms that pass quickly, leaving debris behind for someone else to clean. And yet, I felt lighter. Not happy. Happiness is too much to ask of a man my age, carrying what I carry, but lighter. That night, I poured a glass of wine and stood before Emily's photograph on the mantel. She smiled back at me, frozen forever in her early 30s, her eyes bright with the kind of faith in me I had struggled to believe I deserved. I did it, Em, I whispered. I didn't let him drain me. Not this time. My throat tightened and I raised the glass in a quiet toast. The sea answered through the open window, waves breaking like applause muffled by distance. The days that followed settled into something resembling peace. I walked the beach each morning, leaving footprints in the wet sand only to watch them vanish with the tide. I cooked my meals, simple and unshared. I read in the afternoons, though the words sometimes blurred with fatigue. I slept more soundly, though dreams of Emily still came. Softer now, less accusatory, more like visits. But solitude, even when chosen, has edges. Some evenings, the villa felt too large, the rooms echoing with absence. I'd find myself lingering in the kitchen, imagining Emily at the counter, Margaret at the table, laughter spilling in warm waves. Those ghosts were gentler than Brian's lies, but they were ghosts all the same. Then one evening the phone rang again. Not Brian, not Margaret, David, my nephew. Uncle Richard? His voice was careful, almost formal. I heard about everything. I just wanted to say I'm glad you stood your ground. I swallowed, surprised by the sudden swell in my chest. Thank you, David. And he hesitated. I'd like to come visit. If that's all right. Just me. A weekend. I'll bring food. We'll plan it properly. The difference in his tone was striking. Not assumption, not demand. Invitation. Respect. Yes, I said, my voice soft but firm. That would be good. When I hung up, I realized something had shifted. Maybe justice isn't just about winning. Maybe it's about teaching others how to approach you differently. That night, I sat on the porch, wine glass empty beside me, and watched the Pacific roll black and endless under the moon. The villa stood quiet behind me, no longer a fortress under siege, but a home reclaimed, and I knew the story wasn't over. Victory in court was only the surface. Beneath it, grief still lived, and solitude, and the long work of building a life that was mine, truly mine, for the first time. Chapter 10 would not be written in the courthouse. It would be written here on this shore, with the sea washing clean what could be washed, and leaving the rest for me to carry. The last of the paperwork went into a drawer I rarely opened. Certified receipts, court transcripts, Brian's signed retraction, all filed, all quiet. No longer needing to live on the dining table like a shield. The battle was over, at least the part fought with paper and signatures. What remained was the war inside myself, the slow rebuilding of a man who had spent too many years bending until he nearly disappeared. Some mornings I still woke expecting noise. The thud of feet on stairs, the hiss of beer cans, Jessica barking orders into her phone. But when I opened my eyes, only the ocean was there, steady and ancient. That silence felt different now. Not fragile, not borrowed. It felt like mine. David came the following weekend. True to his word, he arrived alone, a bag slung over his shoulder, groceries in hand. He knocked, imagine that, and waited until I opened the door. A small thing, but it nearly undid me. Uncle Richard, he said, smiling awkwardly. I brought steak. Thought we could cook together. We did. We cooked, we ate, we sat on the porch with the Pacific spread out before us like a secret only we shared. He didn't ask about Brian, didn't prod at wounds still tender. Instead, he spoke of his work, his hopes, his small failures and triumphs. And when he thanked me before leaving for trusting me with your time, I felt something loosen in my chest. Respect, reciprocity, the kind of exchange Emily would have wanted for me. After he left, I lingered on the porch, the night cool against my skin, the stars sharp above the water. I poured a glass of wine and carried it inside, setting it on the mantel beside Emily's photograph. She smiled back at me, forever 32, her eyes bright with faith I had nearly forgotten I deserved. I kept my promise, Em, I whispered. I wasn't weak. I wasn't erased. I raised the glass in a slow, deliberate toast. Not for victory. Victory is hollow without someone to share it with. Not for vengeance. Vengeance corrodes the vessel that carries it. I raised it for justice, for boundaries finally drawn, for the fragile, precious peace of a man who had at last learned the power of no. The waves outside rolled and crashed, each one erasing what it touched, each one beginning again. I stood there, listening until the wine was gone, until the silence felt less like emptiness and more like freedom. And when I finally turned out the lights, the villa seemed to breathe with me. Not a fortress anymore, not a shrine, but simply a home. Mine. Thank you for staying with me, for listening this far. Your attention is a rare and precious gift. These minutes you've spent here mean the world. And if this story meant something to you, if it touched you in some way, and you feel it might stay with you, then please, do this for me. Follow the channel. Every follow, every subscription is more than a number. It's a silent pact. It's the fuel that allows me to keep bringing you stories that have depth, that have truth, that linger. Because in the end, it's stories that connect us. And I want to keep building this journey with you. Until next time,